Hello, everyone, and welcome to Benefits Weekly, where our goal is to take complex health insurance topics and make them easy to understand. So, this week, we're actually talking about a front page news topic, which is the big political fight over the premium tax credits and the resulting government shutdown. I'll tell you, we are recording this on Friday, October the 3rd at about 11:30 a.m. And right now the government shut down. Don't know if that'll still be the case by the time you view this, but still a discussion worth having no matter what. So I know I have been watching this political battle all year long and have talked about, in some of my classes about the possible fallout of the premium or the enhanced premium tax credits ending 2026. Kyle, I know you've been watching this very closely as well and have done a lot of research on it. So I want to hand it over to you here in just a second to kind of tell everyone where we are in this and what it means for the U.S., I guess. But before we do, I do want to at least point out this is a political fight. Obviously, everybody's going to have their own opinions. We're not going to talk about those in this discussion. We're just going to kind of talk about the issues and what both sides are considering and the stance that they have and whether an agreement might be reached, and if it's not, what happens. So, Kyle, with that, what have you found out in your research on this topic?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Eric. And for those that aren't aware, I actually helped build an ACA insurance carrier in the 2010s. And so I was in the front lines of this market for a long time. So in order to understand today, we've got to take a little trip through history. So I'll keep this brief. Now, just as a reminder, in 2010, we got the Affordable Care Act signed by President Obama. Pretty partisan, as we may remember. And if you may also remember, a future president, Mr. Joe Biden, leaned into Obama's ear, I think at the time, and said, this is a big effing deal. It definitely was. It changed a lot of things in the healthcare world. So fast forward 2014, the ACA changed a lot of things about the individual market. Things like guaranteed issue, which meant that no matter if you were sick or healthy or otherwise, you could still get coverage. Removed lifetime and yearly benefit caps. Said a lot of things to kind of make sure it was quality coverage. But also it set up subsidies because this quality coverage for many people was going to be more expensive. And so the government was stepping in to help pay for it with these subsidies. Now, in 2021, we get the next Democratic administration led by President Joe Biden, and they decide as part of the American Rescue Plan Act to enhance the subsidies, essentially juice the punch bowl. You know, if you were going to qualify for a couple $100, maybe now you qualify for a couple $100 more each month. And we can talk about how these work in just a second, but they were temporary and they were only going to last 2 years through the end of 2022. So what happened was another highly partisan, bill comes along in the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, and we get these enhanced tax credits or subsidies extended through the end of 2025. Again, only temporary for 3 years, and that's what brings us to this current moment, where again here in early October, in the start of the new fiscal year for the federal government, the Republicans and the Democrats are at a standstill because the Democrats are fighting tooth and nail to say, let's kind of keep these enhanced subsidies in place going into 2026 and beyond. Hell, let's make them permanent. And the Republicans are standing on principle and saying, no, let's let them sunset because they were only ever meant to be temporary to begin with. So that's our quick history lesson.
So, Kyle, just real quick, the tax credits aren't going away. It's the enhanced tax credits. It's the part that made them better and gave people a little bit more. Would it really make that big of a deal or that big of a difference to most people if we fell back to the pre-2021 numbers?
Like anything, it depends on your personal situation, but that's a really important clarifier. It's not that subsidies altogether are going away. It's just that how they're calculated and then the amount most people would be eligible for would go down because these enhanced amounts, i.e. the extra juice in the punch bowl, would be taken out. So I think one of the best ways for people to wrap their heads around this, honestly, is just to poke around on some of these public websites. It can sound complicated when we use terms like premium tax credits and whatever, but when you just go and enter some information and see how this works practically, it gets pretty simple and intuitive. So, for example, I went on healthcare.gov just this morning, and I typed in, hey, I'm 40 years old. I live in Dallas. Let's assume I make 40 grand a year and I just need coverage for myself. It spits out an estimate and says, hey, we think you're going to qualify for $325 in subsidy each month. Now, note, this is as of today in 2025. So that is the enhanced subsidy amount. And then what I would do is I would just click that green button you see there and say view plans, and everything I would see that I could enroll in here in Dallas, be it Blue Cross, United, a local HMO, whatever, is going to basically show the price. And then with $325 taken off, because the federal government's going to turn around and give that $325 directly to the insurance company each month on my behalf. Now, you asked if the enhanced amount's a big deal. Short answer is definitely yes. This is one of my kind of quick, favorite, simple ways to think about this. So remember I mentioned the ACA really changed the market in 2014. You can see we had about 8 million people sign up. Everyone remembers the disaster that was the rollout of healthcare.gov. I think there's a lot of people out there that work in IT that are still scarred from the experience. But the reality was the market kind of chugged along, but then it really plateaued at like 11, 12 million people throughout the 2010s. 21. Hey, let's spike the punch bowl. Let's give people more subsidies, making the insurance cheaper. And it's basic economics. When things are less expensive, people are going to buy more of it. And so we saw this market double in about 5 years, thanks to these enhanced tax credits.
Big amount.
Yeah. And just so you know, of these 24 million people, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's something like 22 million. It's like over 20 million of them are getting some form of subsidy. And so the vast majority of these 24 million people that are getting some sort of subsidy are likely to see it come down if the enhanced amount goes away.
In addition to that, some of those folks that purchased coverage in the last 5 years were not eligible for a tax credit at all previously because they earned more than 400% of the federal poverty line. And along with the enhanced tax credits, that subsidy cliff that cut off the tax credits or cut off eligibility altogether, that went away. But if the enhanced tax credits expire, the subsidy cliff will also return, and those folks over 400% would no longer receive a subsidy, right?
That's a great point. The enhanced subsidies did two things. One, they simply rejiggered the formula to basically give people more subsidy each month, more money from the taxpayers, from the government. The other thing they did was they removed that subsidy cliff, as we called it. And to put it simply, federal poverty level, call it roughly 15 grand a year for someone. They're considered, below the federal poverty level if they make less than 15 grand. 400% of that would be like, 60 grand or whatever. What happened before is if you made $1 over that, you no longer qualify for subsidies. It was a hard cutoff. But people realized, well, wait a second, this doesn't really seem fair. Let's just remove that kind of artificial cutoff that was built in the law, and let's let the calculator kind of run out no matter where you are on the spectrum. So yeah, you could see a lot of folks that are definitely kind of middle class that lose access to subsidies altogether. Yeah. And just to make it real for a second, I showed you guys this chart a second ago of a 40-year-old in Dallas making 40 grand. Currently, they'd qualify for 325 a month or thereabouts. AFF has a great tool. We'll link to it in this week's article where they actually show you kind of side by side what would the potential subsidy look like without the enhanced amounts. And in this case, it'd go down to 192 a month is their estimate. So it'd be about 40% lower. And the reality is that, that's, what is that? $30 a month over the course of a year. That's $2,000. There's going to be some group of people out there that are in this exact situation that say, you know what? I just can't afford it, or I no longer want the coverage. And the other thing I'd point out is that these are going to be all very situation dependent. What is your household income? Where do you live? How old are you? These are the things that determine what your subsidy amount actually is.
And I think the problem too with that, Kyle, is that as the price goes up for people, that actually leads to what's called adverse selection for the insurance companies because, it might be that lots of people would buy coverage, at $192 a month, but at $325, it's a little too rich for them. They feel fairly healthy. So the healthy people might drop off. Those that have multiple doctor visits, lots of prescriptions, they're the ones that are more likely to keep their coverage, which means that the risk pool, the pool of people that are covered ends up being worse for the insurance company and costing them more.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's kind of this unfortunate flywheel effect where lower subsidies mean that the insurance is going to be more expensive for people. Well, to use a term from like Economics 101, healthy people have more elastic demand, i.e., they are not going to be willing to pay as likely to pay at a higher price as a sick person would with high healthcare needs. So what happens is the healthier people start to drop coverage, which then means that the average person in this kind of pool of people we're insuring is less healthy and therefore using more claims, driving up healthcare costs across the pool of people. So that makes then those premiums go up. And so it's this kind of circular effect where even if you're not getting subsidies today, you're going to see your premium spike going into 2026 as well. And I'll tell you, Eric, candidly, that's the situation that my family will be facing because we buy our own coverage in the individual market and don't receive a subsidy. So we'll see what that new premium looks like here when I get a letter in a couple weeks.
That'll be fun.
Not looking forward to it. There's probably one other thing worth mentioning, which is in addition to this kind of ACA market turbulence being driven by the subsidies and the resulting increase in premiums. The other thing I'll just bring us back to real quick was what Republicans argue is that this dramatic growth in the individual market that we saw in the early 2020s, that a lot of it or some portion of it was fraudulent. Now, it's really hard. There's estimates out there. I think everyone agrees that there's been some fraudulent activity, but where the political debate really enters is how much of this growth was people that didn't really deserve subsidies or shouldn't have signed up. No one knows the right answer. But what's happened is, and this is, I'll just tell you, kind of seeing it front hand is, we as adults all know the phrase trust but verify. It's part of understanding balance and just how we get through life. Well, under the Democratic administration, it's pretty accurate to say that on the exchanges, the Democrats were pretty much like, hey, we're just going to trust everyone. Hey, if you say you make this amount, if you say you qualify for coverage, great, here's your health insurance plan. Now the Republicans are coming in and going, no, we need you to verify. And so they call it the marketplace integrity rules, but essentially they're putting a lot more red tape and verification processes in place to clamp down on some of this potential fraud that's out there. And what we know is going to happen is, yes, some of the fraud will get kind of rooted out of the system, but there's also going to be people that get caught up in that administrative burden of red tape that just say, you know what? I'm not going to bother. I don't need the coverage. Again, who's more likely to do that? Maybe it's the healthy person. So this is another thing we're going to want to watch going into 2026.
With that, I think we'll leave it here because we've got some a great article put together and some great resources. So you can continue reading that. Kyle, thanks for doing all the legwork this week. I think this was very helpful. It's going to be an interesting story to watch, and it's one that's going to impact everybody. So hopefully some sort of resolution will be reached soon.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.